Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're listening to Box F1 Pod. Today we're debriefing the rather mundane Mexican Grand Prix, but I did watch with my grandmother, and she was thoroughly impressed. Young people, old people, men, women, what a sport! So I guess she's a fan. Not sure how she feels about the drivers specifically, because she loves an athlete, but broad shoulders are essential for her, so she'd definitely be into Toto. But anyway, before we get into Babshka Clara's new favorite sport and chat all about the race and review everything, it's time for the digital warm-up. Lap 1, F1 news. So, the Mexican Grand Prix is staying on the calendar through 2025, which is a mixed bag situation because the vibes are beyond. It's an excellent weekend. The track could be better. Also, Alonso's 30-second penalty from last week was rescinded, and he was reinstated back at P7, which honestly was the correct call. They had half a race and all of Park Firm to call out the mirror being dangerous and unsafe, but they didn't. And after that, it's too late. So yay, Fernando. Also, side note, in the press conference, Fernando said that he thinks Lance's penalty was too harsh, which it is immediately obvious that Lance's father is cutting his future checks, because that was a bonkers statement to say, particularly from someone like Fernando. Now on to the major F1 news, the cost cap breach. Both Aston Martin and Red Bull have been found guilty of breaching the cost cap. Aston Martin was fined $450,000 for incorrectly excluding and or adjusting costs in approximately 12 different instances. This, however, was considered a procedural breach, which I guess means someone in accounting fucked up. Red Bull, however, was found guilty of a minor overspend breach. Originally, it was £5 million, I think, and then adjusted for relevant costs, it was actually an overspend of £1,864,000, which is 1.6% of the cap. And then after taking taxes into account, was reduced to £432,652, which is approximately 0.37% of the cap. So essentially, Red Bull has overspent a little less than £500,000, and their punishment was a fine of $7 million to be paid within 30 days of verdict. And they received a 10% reduction in aerodynamic testing. So wind tunnel and all that stuff, they have 10% reduction in costs that they can put towards that. Now, before I continue, what I'm about to say may sound like I'm condoning the breach, so I want to preface with a disclaimer that obviously breaking the rules is bad, but I don't necessarily think that this was malicious on Red Bull's part, though it very well could be. I just think that it is reasonable to think that they believed that they were within the limits, and then they just weren't. But they also could have tried to cut corners, so who knows for sure. I do think that $7 million is a bit steep of a fine, and added on to the reduction in testing, I think that's kind of harsh. I think maybe one or the other would have made more sense, although $7 million is still a huge number for less than $500,000 in overspend. Although I guess I'm sort of in the minority because all the comments on social media seem to say that this is just a slap in the wrist and now everyone's going to cheat because this punishment is nothing. And maybe I don't know enough about team finances to figure out who's right or wrong. It just seems like an odd combination of punishments. Okay, so basically Red Bull was found to have overspent on 13 items. Only, from my perspective, maybe I'm misinterpreting, but from my perspective, only 3 of these are actually development related. One item was related to the cost of use of power units. The second was cost of maintenance, though it doesn't say maintenance of what. Could have been maintenance of the oven. And the third was the use of inventories, though again, it doesn't specify inventory of what? Maybe it was like potatoes. So like, but those are the only ones that I can see being at all related to development. The rest of the infractions include one clerical error, one infraction to travel costs, and the remainder were all related to employee compensation. So like besides the first three, and then I guess travel, but that's not actually related to development of the car. It's just moving your development. So I don't really get it. But I can see why Red Bull might think that these items are not relevant costs. Like they treat their employees well. So well-treated employees are more likely to make better developments. Is that the logic here? Anyway, from like my POV, which really means absolutely nothing since I don't actually fully know the rules and I don't really know math. But to me, it seems like there were only 3 items that they could be punished for, which makes 7 million and a 10% reduction in testing time seem a bit aggressive. Especially since, despite Red Bull being sus at the best of times, I'm inclined to believe this was an accidental overspend. And if not accidental, then at the very least, like, in good faith, like they believed that they were allowed to spend more in these areas because they weren't relevant costs. Again, though, I just want to make clear that I obviously do think a punishment was warranted. Everybody else was able to stay within the cost cap. So, like, clearly I might not be understanding something, or I should probably work for Red Bull because I'm spouting out these excuses left and right. But anyway, the reason this story makes me, like, all giddy is because Christian Horner is just so, like, deliciously dramatic and petty. I say it every week, but bravo, Andy Cohen, you're really missing out on reality TV gold. So if you're a drama enthusiast such as myself, watching Christian Horner, aka Drama Spice, operate in front of a camera is like honestly a privilege. And again, I understand Christian to a certain degree. The word cheating implies intention. And if they breach the cost cap accidentally might mean misinterpreting the rules or not understanding that this is a relevant cost or a pure accident. Then I can see how these accusations might be frustrating. Do I think that these accusations warrant like a soliloquy worthy of a Greek drama? No. But that didn't stop Christian. He gave a press conference to explain Red Bull's perspective and pretty much said what I argued a couple minutes before, that the majority of the overspend went to sick leave or catering, which they assumed was not within relevant costs. He says not a penny was spent on performance of the vehicle. Based on the infractions that have been marked, that seems true, so I'm not fully sure. But some of my favorite quotes from this press conference include that A, he's astounded that no one else breached the cost cap in the same way, which kind of sounds like he's saying he's astounded that no one pays sick leave to their employees. He does say that there are accounting lessons to be learned here, which kind of makes it sound like their next breach will be overspending on continued education for their accountants. He also says that there can be anywhere between 0.25 and 0.5 seconds lost in lap time, given the 10% reduction in aerodynamic testing, also known as ATR. And then here are some of my favorite, like, direct quotes. But what we've lost in ATR, we've gained in motivation. I'm sure for some competitors, if you burned our wind tunnels down, it wouldn't be enough. Adrian is better placed than any of us to describe the draconianness of a wind tunnel penalty. And you have to remember, we operate out of a wind tunnel that is actually a relic of the Cold War. It's not a state-of-the-art wind tunnel that our competitors enjoy. It was built in the 1950s. And it has its own limitations. And therefore, a penalty like this is hugely draconian. In response to whether an apology from Red Bull is necessary for a breach in rules and distracting from the sport, he says, I think we're due an apology from our rivals for some of the claims that they've made. We make no apology for the way we've performed, the way that we've acted. We take it on the chin that there are lessons to be learned. There was no intent, there was nothing dishonest, and there was certainly no cheating involved, which has been alleged in certain corners. So I don't feel that we need to apologize. We've taken a very public pounding for the accusations made by other teams. We've had our drivers booed at circuits, and the reputational damage that's been made by allegations has been significant. Time is now for that to stop and now to move on. So, in conclusion, not to be like a Red Bull apologist, but being generous to their employees isn't like the worst thing a team could do. And also, I will always be grateful for Christian Horner's ability to wax poetic about anything. All right, lap 2, petty paddock, which is what I'm renaming the paddock because there was so much pettiness happening this week, it just was out of control. In addition to like this entire press conference that Christian made, Max and all of Red Bull are boycotting Sky Sports. Because apparently pettiness is the name of the game at Red Bull. So all of Red Bull, including Christian, Max, Checo, etc., refused to speak to Sky Sports at the Mexican Grand Prix, and the boycott is indefinite. Basically, Sky Sports has always kind of swayed towards Lewis. All British commentators, it's kind of to be expected. But Ted Kravitz, the one with the notebook, he in particular has been a bit more vocal about this. Last week, he slipped up about Lewis being an 8-time world champion and made a couple of little offhanded remarks like those where he pretended like it was off the cuff, but it kind of didn't feel off the cuff. So I honestly can't blame Max and co for being salty, and that nearly a year later an official media channel is being kind of overtly biased about this, which is like the kind of stuff you see on Twitter, but you don't necessarily expect it from a news channel. So I get it. But do I think boycotting the entire channel, including Sky Sports and the other countries, is an appropriate reaction? Not really. But, it's the kind of pettiness that Red Bull thrives on. So, Max actually discussed the boycott at the post-race conference. Need I mention that Max is wearing a curved cap? So, Curved Cap Max has entered the chat. And to be honest, he's quite calm and level-headed and actually gives a very mature response. He says, not this race in particular, but this entire year, it's been a constant kind of digging, being disrespectful, especially one particular person. And at one point, it's enough. I can't accept it. You can't live in the past. You just have to move on. And at the moment, social media is a very toxic place. And if you are constantly being, like that on live TV, you make it only worse instead of trying to make it better in the world. You keep disrespecting me. And at this point, I'm not tolerating it anymore. To be fair, he has a point. If anyone was talking shit about my accomplishments in real life, I wouldn't want to deal with them either. Is it unfair that we kind of expect them to put those sort of feelings aside, given their responsibilities with media? Yeah, but it is part of their job. At the same time, from a mental health perspective, and actually from a maturity perspective, when you don't like what's being said about you, you remove yourself from the situation. It's still kind of petty. Despite how mature and level-headed I think his response is and how understandable it is, it still feels a bit petty, especially boycotting all the other sports. I'd understand not talking to Ted Kravitz. Maybe understand not talking to some of the other commentators, but boycotting the other countries is a step too far, I think. During this whole time, Lewis is completely silent, by the way. But this question was followed up with another question about the toxicity on social media. Max obviously doubles down on his spiel about social, and also he credits the growth of the sport to the growth in negativity. Checo echoes his sentiments and says the sport and the social platforms need to do more to ensure a safer space. Weirdly, this sort of stuff is usually right up Lewis's alley. We need to create a safe, secure space where everyone's respected and love and peace and all that stuff. But He seems completely indifferent and doesn't really want to answer. He even pretends like he doesn't remember the question. He's like, oh, what are we talking about again? But then he basically just says, yeah, social media platforms aren't doing enough to protect women and children. Women and children? I get this is a bit weird for him considering Max is boycotting a channel because they said that Lewis is the real winner and not Max, and has somehow expanded this to toxicity on social media. But he usually loves this shit. He's usually like all about preaching positivity and good vibes. So it's kind of weird that he doesn't want to chime in. But at the same time, you can't expect much from Max and Lewis. Yeah, so anyway, do I love the pettiness from Red Bull? Yes. Do I agree with it or think it makes sense or see any point to this whatsoever? Not really. Just to make a point, I guess. Okay, on to other petty drama, which I'm very excited about. Fernando versus Lewis. So earlier this weekend, Fernando said, this year Max is very dominant. He could cruise to the world title. Last season it was different. I thought he performed better than Lewis in the end, and therefore I think he is a worthy champion. I also have a lot of respect for Lewis. However, it is different when you win 7 world titles when you have only had to fight with your teammate. Then, I think a championship has less value than when you've had fewer titles but are driving against other drivers with equivalent or even better equipment. In 2005 and 2006, I had a good start to the year myself and was able to create a lead. Then others might have had a better car, but I was able to manage that gap. I never had to fight with my teammate to win those titles, nor did I see Max fighting with Perez or Albon to win races. But Schumacher in particular fought with his teammate to become champion 5 times in a row, and Hamilton fought with Rosberg and Bottas. That's different, I think. So that went viral. And then he posted on Twitter, like, a clarification, I guess. He wrote, and again, please, all the titles are amazing, well-deserved, and inspiring, incomparable to each other, and let's enjoy champions and legends of our current time. Tired of the continuous search for headlines. Let's enjoy them. Okay, but you also literally just said, well, okay, that's not true. I understand what he was trying to say. He was trying to say that Max, I guess, deserves respect for winning the championships by fighting rivals with equivalent cars, particularly last year. He's not really referring to this year. He was talking specifically about last year. And that fighting against your own teammate is not necessarily the same, which is fair. And maybe it just came off brattier than intended and more of a dig than he wanted it to be when he was probably just dissecting it, like, factually. But Lewis, who I guess either didn't see Fernando's clarification or didn't care, posted a picture of him next to Fernando on the podium several years back. Fernando's in second place. And he captioned it just with a thumbs up. And honestly, he was asked about it at the post-race press conference, and he just giggled, and I giggled too. I love Petty Lewis. I love it when he gets sassy. This feels like a normal reaction and not like overthought or too serious or like too PR-y as he sometimes comes off. So like I fully support all this pettiness for my entertainment. I loved seeing this from Lewis. He's been extra sassy recently. I forgot to mention, but he posted a bunch of pictures from Austin and wrote, Austin dump before Pierre Gasly gets to it, and tagged Pierre. And I've just like never really seen him banter with drivers all that often. So that was fun to see. I love it when he's like human and not like this out of reach thing that just like dresses well and exists in his own universe, you know? It's fun when he comes down to the little peeps. All right, lap 3 off the grid. So, Lance Stroll turned 24. He had a cute little birthday celebration with all the engineers and Seb. Lawrence was not seen on premises. I don't know if he's not at the race or if he doesn't give a shit. But Lance got a platter full of cupcakes, and he was gifted with like a life-size card from the team, and it was fun to see him banter with them. He like makes a joke to his engineer saying, "You've grown a bit, Scotty." Scotty was like, "Yeah, I was really close to the camera that day." Honestly, it seems like the team really likes him, which is very nice to see. because I feel like Lance gets kind of a bad rep. But he seems like a sweet guy. Also, Lance is like fully in his Shark Boy era. Like off track, physically, on track, just slamming his way through the grid. But also, quick moment I need to mention that we're talking about Aston Martin. At the driver's parade, Seb like went rogue and takes over Lance's car, like kicks the driver out, and just crosses across the track, like cutting through to wave to all the fans and say hi. Lance was just chilling. They're just cute together. Also, Lance may be going through his like Shark Boy era, but Seb is going through his trashy European footballer era, where he's wearing like his hair looks like it hasn't been washed in about a month. It's like past his chin, and he's wearing just a thin white headband on top of it that's doing zero to assist anything. And it's just like peak 2010s European footballer. So there's quite an aesthetic going on over in the Aston Martin garage. Mexico, however, like the vibes are everything. It was such a great atmosphere. It radiated through the various screens I'm forced to enjoy F1 through, like lots of Mexican-inspired garb, masks, hats, etc. The greatest parts, though, to me personally, were probably first the mariachi version of the F1 theme song. That slaps. That is so good. That should just be the official one. And the second one, well, it's a bit like, it's like an acoustic-y version, so maybe not every week, but it really is a banger. But the second thing is that all the drivers were gifted with piñatas of themselves, and they look nothing like any of them. Like, not a single one of them is like even close to resembling the driver, other than their form, their kit, their sports kit. Also, Martin Garrix is there. He's actually DJing the podium and after party, but before the race, the dude is literally John Tucker. And like, you know that first scene of the movie when it's like the school fair with all the different clubs, and he's like moving from clique to clique, making out with each of his girlfriends behind like random pillars? That's Martin Garrix. He has like a picture with Max, then he has like a whole like hug moment with Daniel, and then he hangs out with Lando and Pierre after the race. He's all over the place, but like the different garages kind of serve as the like different clubs that all the girls were part of, so he can easily maneuver between them and they never have to find out. He did get shown on TV and he was interviewed a couple of times, and honestly he seems like really shy and kind of sweet, but he an F1 groupie for real. Like, he might be cute and shy, but he's got his claws in half the drivers on the grid. Speaking of groupies, I don't know if I can call him that. Speaking of fans, Checo and Lewis's dad. By the way, Lewis's dad looks incredible. Wait, kind of DILF. He's DILFing. No offense to Checo's dad, he's not really DILFing. He's got other stuff going for him. But Lewis's dad is DILFing hard. Anyway, a few races ago, there was like an absolutely iconic moment that was photographed and imprinted in our brains forever. And it was Checo's dad planting like an aggressive cheek kiss on Lewis's dad. And today they recreated that picture but swapped places. So Lewis's dad planted like a big one on Checo's dad's cheek, and it was so cute. And those two pictures will be side by side forever. And I just love it. Checo's dad is so wholesome that he can like literally mend friendships, like stop wars, like I don't even know. A Merc rivalry won't stop him. I love him. Okay, lap 4, outfit of the day. Lewis stepped onto the paddock with some more off-the-runway matching sets and a couple of, like, all-white outfits. I like them all, but, like, I'm not super crazy about any of them. Notably, though, Lewis was on Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy said, "You might be the most stylish F1 driver of all time." And Lewis said, "I definitely am." But clearly, Jimmy has never seen Guan Yu, who blessed the paddock with more Prada. I'd like to see some versatility from him, TBH. But he was wearing a Pikachu t-shirt, which is always a win in my book. And then, king and queen of the friggin' paddock, Alex and Lily, the true stars, who like pulled a Carmen and George with one of like my favorite look. Sorry, when I say Carmen and George, I think of Carmen Sandiego and Curious George. Just an odd combo. But anyway, they stepped in with like the whole like matching vibes, like color scheme thing going on where they're like boy band matching, but like they're not full on matching. First of all, they're both blonde now and look fabulous. Second of all, they went with like a fall aesthetic, so they're both wearing like dark green cargo pants. Alex wore a dark blue sweater with 2 upside down A's in the corner, which Alex Albon, but also could be W for Williams, so it's just a win-win. And Lily wore like a brown beige striped top and a chocolate brown trench coat. So like not only are they my favorite couple personality-wise, but now they're like physically fire too, and they just win everything for me. No couple comes even close to them. You cannot convince me otherwise. Lily and Alex, just 10 out of 10 in every category. Also, not a driver and not on track, but must be mentioned. A photo circulated online of Toto wearing Daniel Ricciardo merch, the Enchanté sweatshirt with the oranges. So he's like sitting in a restaurant in Danny Rick's sweatshirt and wearing like ski glasses / Kim Kardashian type glasses that are like reflective. And it's an incredible photo. It's amazing. And there's a video of Daniel doing an interview after the race today, and mid-interview, he's shouting at a passing Toto going, "Where's my merch?" And Toto stops by and starts talking to him about the fact that he was wearing his merch. And one of the interviewers is like, "Why do you hate wearing the merch?" And Toto was like, "No, I love it, but they put up a picture of me in some stupid glasses, but I love it. I'm promoting his merchandise." Which, I don't know why Mercedes is just like total Daniel stans now, because remember a few weeks ago, George was pictured wearing his girlfriend's Danny Rick merch. So Mercedes is like #1 Daniel Ricciardo fans, which is only fueling the rumors that he will become a Mercedes reserve driver next year, since Nick DeVries is leaving. Which honestly, I think reserve driver is a pretty good move for Daniel. Because like remember at the beginning of the year when Seb had COVID and Nico Hulkenberg had to fill in? Remember how chill he was? Like he didn't train, he didn't worry, he just like showed up, took a bunch of selfies, didn't give a shit. I think Daniel needs that energy. So like here's hoping he can stay F1 adjacent for the time being before making an epic return. And also here's to seeing more Daniel Ricciardo merch in the paddock. Okay, well, that concludes our digital warm-up. On to the race rhyme. Ole, 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 Checo, Checo. Welcome to Mexico. Come on, vámonos. Everybody, let's go. Where are we going? To the petty paddock. Fernando really said Max's wins are worth more, and that's the sitch. So Lewis Hamilton was all like, thumbs up, bitch. But Ted Kravitz is all like, Max's wins don't really count, man. So Red Bull was all like, fine, talk to the hand. And let's not forget Red Bull's draconian punishment. I mean, it was a bit excessive, but Christian, let's chill on the Shakespearean astonishment. If only the Mexican GP provided a race with this much drama. Instead, it made me want to Nat Pandey replay a la Rihanna. Quick recap about our situation. Tire deck is V-likely given the heat and elevation. With Max in P1, who knows which way this will go? JK, obvi Max takes the lead and basically keeps it the whole show. Checo fights his way to P3 and that's where he stays. Lewis has got P2 unlocked, but George in P4 is complaining for days. Quick shout out to Pierre's weekly 5-second penalty. I'm sure the FIA isn't salty with him, and this is totes coincidentally. The real star of the show today was Daniel Ricciardo, who suddenly pulled out the skills of Max and the aggression of Fernando. First, Daniel battles Yuki for 12th position, but accidentally causes a collision. And just like that, Yuki Tsunoda is out of the race. Danny has a penalty of 10 secs. Will he find the pace? Not only does Danny Rick overtake 4 cars to land in P7, he builds enough of a gap to keep position, no question. What a drive from legend Danny Rick. He deserves some spicy marks tonight. After all, high-performance athletes sweat, real sweat after such a fight. Keep, rah. The race is over with Max, Lewis, and Checo in P1, 2, and 3. I guess like Martin Garrix being the #1 F1 groupie, a Red Bull win is guaranteed. We're signing off from the Mexican GP. Remember though, Checo's dad is the real MVP. On to analysis. Alright, So what a boring race. A few like random stuff. Apparently Brad Pitt sent an apology note to Martin Brundle for ignoring him on the track, which is very nice of Brad Pitt. Unnecessary, but very nice. Also, Alfa Romeo last won a race 71 years ago. It's a long time. All right, so quali. Mick and Seb both get out in Q1, but they have the exact same time, which is just nice. Also, there was an amazing performance from Valtteri, who qualified in P6 and split up the Ferraris, and it is the best result for Alfa Romeo yet. So go Valtteri. There's also a video that went viral of like the top 3 taking the photo together after qualifying, and then as soon as the photo is taken, George and Lewis immediately walk off and Max is just left there standing alone. Just lots of memes, but it's kind of sad. So the final results are Max on pole, followed by George, Lewis, Checo, Carlos, Valtteri, Charles, Lando, Fernando, Esteban, Daniel, Guan Yu, Yuki, Pierre, Mick, Seb, Alex, Latifi, Kevin, Magnussen with a 5-place grid drop for extra power unit elements, and final is Lance Stroll with a 3-place grid drop for the collision with Fernando last week. Some things that we want to remember about this race. 1, super high altitude, which means thinner air, which means unpredictable car performance, and also unpredictable tire performance. So there's a possibility for revised strategy calls. Of course, it could also affect the driver's performance, but they all seemed fine after the race, so I don't think the high altitude actually made much of a physical impact today. And it's also pretty hot, so the elevation and the heat together is definitely going to affect tire degradation, as we will see. All the drivers begin the race split on tire type, so majority of the grid opted for mediums, but both the Red Bulls notably are on softs. So the start of the race, most of the front of the grid had a pretty good start, but Max's was particularly good, which is a shocker. He pulled ahead almost immediately. Both Mercedes are side by side, trailing right behind him, with Lewis eventually pulling into P2 after a couple of turns. And almost immediately after that, Checo overtakes George into P3. Valtteri, who notably started in P6, has fallen back to P8 by lap 2. The Ferraris, on the other hand, are basically side by side through the first couple of laps, but don't really have the performance to move anywhere besides where they are. Both of the McLarens have fallen back from where they started, which is important given how Daniel's race pans out, but we'll get to that in a second. Quickly, I want to talk about Pierre, who got a 5-second penalty for pushing Lance off track. He also got a penalty point for this, which brings his total to 10 points. And he is now only 2 points away from a race ban. You need 12 penalty points to be banned from a race. But because he received his first penalty point in May 2022, and penalty points last 12 months, he basically has to be extra careful through May of 2023. And this is kind of wild because Pierre is definitely like not known and doesn't really strike me as a dangerous or aggressive driver. He received 2 penalty points in Spain and then 3 points in Austria. And then he went 6 races without any issues before getting 5 penalty points 3 races in a row. Notably, after his like major tiff with Stu at the Japanese Grand Prix, that's when he like started getting penalty points every single race thereafter. I'm totally starting a baseless rumor here, but is the FIA peeved with Pierre for causing a scene in Japan? I mean, he was so unnecessarily dramatic about a tractor being in the middle of a Dementor-infiltrated track with 0 visibility. I don't know. To me, it seems like Pierre is like on the receiving end of Stu's like 5-second penalty one. About a 5-second penalty. No matter what he does, he gets a penalty point. I for sure think there's some bias here, and I do think Stu is kind of salty about how Pierre handled Japan. Although, again, how else was Pierre supposed to handle Japan? He almost died. But a lot of the drivers are actually displeased with the FIA's approach to penalty points in general, not just handing out 5-second penalties, which I think they're far too lenient with anyways, but particularly how they it's not really awarding, punish with penalty points on the super license. Drivers are not really happy with those rules, so maybe they need to be revised altogether. In general, though, I just kind of feel bad for Pierre. He can't catch a break. He's not actually doing anything that bad. All right, let's talk about Red Bull quickly. As I noted at the beginning, both Red Bull started on softs, which means they both had to pit much earlier than Mercedes. Checo pit first and had a 5-second pit stop, which really kind of set him back for the remainder of the race. When he pitted, he was in P3, but he comes out in P6, which puts him behind both Mercedes and Ferraris. And that's really unfortunate considering that on average, he's had the fastest pit stops of the season. Like they basically average 2.1, 2.3, which is insane. But of course, I just love hometown races because when Checo overtakes Stroll into P4, the crowd goes insane. It is genuinely a deafening roar. And it's cool. There was 400,000 people there. It's insanity. Checo does spend most of the race in P3, which is impressive considering his lengthy pit stop. The condition his tires were in, he basically had to spend the rest of the race managing his tires since he pitted in lap 20. And considering he was always being challenged or had the ability to challenge Lewis, for example, he kind of always had to be on guard. Max, on the other hand, pitted a couple laps after Checo. It was a much faster pit stop. He also finishes the race on the same set of mediums. So he's also had to focus a lot on tire management. And obviously I recognize that's super hard to do, but I will say it seems like Checo's performance overall is a bit more impressive for me because, again, of the challengers and the ability to challenge was in his grasp, whereas Max was kind of on his own. He was 14 seconds ahead. So there was no one for him to challenge. He had to he lapped a few people, but there was no one for him to challenge and there was no one for him to defend against. So he was just sort of floating around. There's also a theory that they base their soft to medium to end of the race strategy on Daniel, who switched from mediums about 50 laps into the race, which gave Red Bull the assurance that both drivers could make it to the end of the race on their mediums, because Daniel had gone 50 laps-ish on mediums, and that would be how much Red Bull would go on their mediums by the end of the race. So it's nice when you can test it on other people and you don't have to test it on your own drivers. Anyway, let's talk about Mercedes for a hot sec. Both Mercedes started on mediums before switching to hards, even though both said their tires felt fine. Literally, they got boxed a lap after saying they were fine. In hindsight, I think Merc believes that their strategy was not great. Although, if they had been on the same strategy as Red Bull, that doesn't necessarily mean they would have stood a better chance, since Red Bull is just faster in general. Lewis did drive a pretty good race. He maintained P2 for a bulk of it. George, on the other hand, was so whiny. First, he insisted on staying out. And he's let's see how long these can go. And his engineers were that would require us to be out for a long time. And then he was forced to box. And then later he gets on the radio and complains that he doesn't like his tires, to which the commentators said, "There's nothing we can do, Georgie boy." A few laps later, George gets on the radio again and just says, "I'm boxing." And his engineers are stay out. Stay out. I don't know if it's because he had a lonely race and felt like it wasn't going anywhere, and so he got antsy and needed to do something, even if it was going to be bad or catastrophic or whatever. Or maybe even some of his complaints were warranted. But overall, it was just annoying. But finally, in the second to last lap, he's allowed to come in. He changes to soft so he could get past this lap, which he did. So way to go, George, I guess. But really, he needs there needs to be a child child lock on his radio button. He should not be allowed to press it as often as he does. All right, now let's talk about the highlight of the day. Daniel and Yuki So Daniel had a bit of a shaky start. He ends up in P13, but he rather quickly makes his way to P12, which isn't far, but he makes his way to P12, and now he's battling Yuki for P11 for quite a while. Yuki does a pretty great job defending. He keeps up with Daniel. He doesn't let him pass. He's doing pretty good. And then Daniel tries to overtake again, but there's not a lot of space for him, and there wasn't a lot of space when he started to, so I don't know why he did. And so obviously he ends up hitting Yuki, who gets lifted up by Daniel's car and goes off track. He has a giant hole in the side of his car, but he does manage to make it back to the pit lane. They do try to patch him up. My theory is they couldn't find the duct tape because his race is done. He has DNF. TBT to that time that AlphaTauri duct taped Yuki's car. Daniel gets handed a 10-second penalty and eventually 2 penalty points for causing the collision, which it was Daniel's fault. He deserved the penalty, I think. Daniel low-key argued that it wasn't totally his fault, but it was his fault. He deserved the penalty. What confuses me is George did literally the exact same thing last week to Carlos. He took him out in the first lap and he only got a 5-second penalty. Was it because it was on the opening lap? Does that make it somehow like less egregious? If anything, I feel like that makes it more egregious because Carlos went like 4 feet. Like, I don't understand how the same exact incident that takes someone out of the race doesn't deserve the same punishment. It's a little inconsistent and confusing. Anyways, a 10-second penalty seemed to like awaken the bull deep inside Daniel, who not only proceeded to overtake 4 places, he also built more than a 10-second gap between him and Esteban so that he wouldn't lose P7 at the end of the race. I mean, talk about impressive. I think we're all happy to see Daniel back on track today. I do have to say, the most savage tweet, though, that I read about this entire situation, I couldn't. I laughed, but it was intense. At I'm ED said, well, Daniel might have points and driver of the day today, but Yuki has a contract. I'm not even sorry. Brutal, but funny. Anyway, Fernando was having a very Fernando day. You know, like, there was a children's book like, Fernando woke up today. Fernando started the race. Fernando cruised along in P7. Fernando led a classic Fernando train. Business as usual for Fernando. Until lap 61 when his engine just died in a steamy ball of smoke and it ended his race. Which is also kind of very Fernando. Or Alpine at the very least. His exit was rather dramatic. He like got out of the car, thanked the fans, waved up to them, and then there was like a video circulating. I don't know the order of this, but it seemed like he waved first, and then there was a video circulating of him like in slow motion, like banging his fist against the car in frustration. Although it would seem that he would first be frustrated and then wave, not like wave and then bang. Anyway. That video was also played in the cool down room, like the slow motion fist banging against the car, and it was like from the back of the driver's heads, so you could see Lewis just like sipping on his water and looking on, and that screenshot went viral. My soundtrack of choice, Karma by Taylor Swift. By the way, has anyone listened to Midnights, specifically Midnights 3 a.m.? Because I'm obsessed. I am still assessing, but I'm starting to get some favorite tracks, but it is great. Bangers all around. Also, question, ... question mark. Does she watch F1? That was for sure written, like, within the last 2 months after she heard Ferrari's radio. Anyway, tell me your favorite Taylor Swift song, because I love the new album. Total side note. But anyway, everyone was banging on about how, Fernando's DNF was karma for Fernando because he talked shit about Lewis before the race, and now Lewis gets to watch his DNF from the cool down room, which is kind of an epic, like, what goes around comes around, full circle moment. But I did feel for Fernando, who, like, by all accounts had an incredible season, and he doesn't necessarily have the results to prove it, but that sort of seems like the story of Fernando's life, who is an astonishingly incredible driver with only 2 world championships under his belt. But anyway, let's talk about post-race podium, specifically the Perez's. Checo's dad is everything. He's so happy. He's so excitable. He's so cute. I could literally watch him all day with the flag, like twisting and turning the flag to make sure it's just right and lifting it in the air. Checo's dad also did the post-win team photo with the Red Bull team, and he like shook the Red Bull can and threw away a sombrero, pumped his fist into the air as the team was chanting, "Ole, ole, 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 Checo, Checo." But like, my favorite part about Checo's dad is that Checo has a constant look of mild embarrassment whenever his father's around. Like, father's always grabbing him and kissing him on the forehead and like cheering and grinning and grabbing everyone and hugging and smiling and waving, and Checo just looks like, please stop. Take a chill pill, Dad. Also, big Checo moment. When Lewis was giving his post-race interview, there was a lot of booing, and huge props to Checo. He like waved his finger at the crowd to tell them to stop, which a finger wag might seem like nothing, but I haven't seen Max or Lewis do that at their respective races. They just like condemn it later when they're asked about it, but I've never seen them like in the moment tell people to stop. Whereas Checo like full on was like, guys, And finally, Checo Jr. remains the cutest kid alive. This trio of Perez men is just everything to me. So here are some of my favorite quotes from post-race. At the post-race press conference, Max was asked about his new record that he set, which is 14 wins in one season. And the interviewer said, "Max, last year you said you don't really care about setting the record for most races. Is this a tactic? Like, why don't you care?" And Max goes, "I don't know. I've never really cared about stats. I just try to live in the moment." Okay, Max. Since when are you like a walking like TJ Maxx cup or sign, kitchen sign? Chill. But I believe he doesn't care about stats at all. It was the I live in the moment bit that got me. Post-race, also, George said if it was at the start, he had a chance to retain P2, but it would have required him to be aggro George, and we all know what happens when George gets aggro. You don't want to see me angry. But he obviously didn't do that since it was Lewis, and he let Lewis through. And after the race, George said, if it was anyone else besides my teammate, I probably would have rammed them off the road. And honestly, this honesty is kind of refreshing. Like, we're all petty. We just don't want to admit it. Honestly, this weekend has been just like prime time for pettiness. And like, okay, we need to take a vote. Who is king of the petty paddock at the Mexican Grand Prix? And a reminder that this is an honor, not an insult. Okay, king of the petty paddock. Is it A, Christian Horner saying everyone else owes him an apology for the cheating accusations? B, Red Bull as a whole for boycotting Sky Sports? C, Fernando for saying Max's wins count more than Lewis's? D, Lewis's thumbs up in response? Or E, George's admission that he would have knocked any other driver out of his way had it not been his teammate? There were almost as many petty moments as there are plans at Ferrari. Just missing an F. All right, cast your votes. I need to know who you think takes the petty award this weekend. Anyway, so in discussing his win, well, no, it wasn't a win. In discussing his performance, Daniel said that he's planning on having a few spicy margaritas. He also said that he doesn't care about the penalty points because he only has 2 races left, which is true. Also, it was a very cute moment when he was done. He's like, "Goodbye, F1 world." And Rosanna, who does the post-race show on F1 TV, was like, "What? What do you mean? You still have 2 races left?" He's like, "Oh no, for like right now." And she's like, "Oh, okay." I felt that. But also, speaking of the post-race show, Nick DeVries, who hosted like half of it before he had to catch a plane, said that Daniel probably deserved the penalty because the collision was like his fault. He also said Yuki did not deserve that to happen to him. He also said that Pierre does not deserve all the penalty points he's getting this year. And I just like to say that I love how hard Nick DeVries is going for his future teammate / the guy he's replacing. He also just seems like he's got like a lot of banter. And I love his rapport with Rosanna. Although, kind of just seems like he likes to get his flirt on. I don't know if it's rapport or just flirting. But anyway, super excited to see him next year. Also, need to call back to FP1 when Carlos's engineer told him that Nick DeVries is behind him. And Carlos was like, there's debris. So that should make for some fun radio next year. All right, so the race results were as follows. Max in P1, followed by Lewis, Checo, George, Carlos, Charles, Daniel, Esteban, Lando, Valtteri, Pierre, Alex, Guan Yu, Seb, Lance, Mick, Kevin, Latifi, and with Fernando and Yuki's DNF, Latifi finished the race last, which I would also like to point out that Nicholas Latifi was the only driver to be lapped twice. He was also lapped by Alex Albon. All right. Okay, so driver of the day / Dick in the box. Officially, Daniel Ricciardo is driver of the day, and I could not agree more. He was an animal on the track. High performance athlete. Sweat, baby, sweat. Brah. He fully deserved the spicy margaritas he planned to have post-race. However, as much as Daniel is driver of the day, Daniel is also today's Dick in the box because he did cause the collision with Yuki and Yuki's subsequent DNF, but we stan a multi-dimensional protagonist. Onions have layers, ogres have layers, drivers have layers. Those overtakes and building that 10-second gap was the work of an artist. And today we peeled back Daniel's McLaren aero layer and found what we've suspected all along, that Daniel Ricciardo is still a parfait underneath. Winning or losing, with a seat or without a seat, as driver of the day or as Dick in the box, Daniel Ricciardo's smile shines just as brightly. Love Daniel. All right, standings. Obviously, Max is leading by an inordinate amount of points. With 416 points, he's got a 136-point lead. Second is Checo with 280 points, followed by Charles with a 5-point difference, followed by George at 231, followed by Lewis with 216, followed by Carlos with 212. Honestly, credit where credit's due, Lewis and George are the only drivers in the top 6 that have not won a race this year. That's where consistency gets you, bro. Good for them. It's really awesome. The most significant driver championship fights left are between Checo and Charles, and then Lewis and Carlos, probably. Although drivers always say only first matters, Charles did concede that second is better than third, which is a relief to hear one of them say. But anyway, in terms of constructors, Red Bull has obviously already won with 696 points. Ferrari is not a close second, but they have 487 points. Mercedes is behind them with 447 points. So if Ferrari doesn't get their shit together, then Mercedes could easily swing those 20 plus points over the next 2 races. So second place is very much still up for grabs. Besides Williams, everyone else has single-digit differences in points. Alpine is holding on to 4th by only 7 points. And McLaren is trying to catch up, though I don't think they'll succeed. Alfa Romeo is holding on to 5th by 4 points. And given their reliability issues, Aston Martin could easily catch up over the next 2 races. Haas is ahead of AlphaTauri by 1 point. If we consider Pierre's luck this year and how he's fallen out with Stu, it's likely that Haas might actually secure 8th in the championship, which compared to their 0-point finish last year is a huge win. And I would like to remind everyone that Mick did contribute at least 1 point to that. I can't remember exactly how many, but at least 1. And so I really would like Gunther to consider that when he's trying to figure out what to do with Mick next year. Anyway, so much is still to play for, aka money. Next up is Brazil, and then it's the final race in Abu Dhabi. I'm actually going to London for a couple of weeks. Finally, going to catch up with some uni friends and just break my Europe-less streak that I had during COVID. So I will be watching the last 2 races from London. If there are any London-based boxes that have suggestions for F1 related activities in the area or places that are great to watch the race, or is everyone just watching the race? Like, can I just walk into any pub and watch the race? I hope so. Please drop me a message. Would love to hear your insider's knowledge to F1 in London. But otherwise, I'll chat to you guys in a couple weeks. Make sure you follow me on social media at BoxBoxF1Pod to keep up with all the in-between happenings. And also, again, don't forget to rate, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with potential boxes. See y'all in Brazil. Box.